Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer, poet, editor, and literary critic. Poe is best known for his poetry and short stories, particularly his tales of mystery and the macabre. He is widely regarded as a central figure of Romanticism in the United States and of American literature. Poe was one of the country's earliest practitioners of the short story and considered to be the inventor of the detective fiction genre as well as a significant contributor to the emergent genre of science fiction. Life and career of Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was born on January 19, 1809, in Boston to the family of actors. When he was 1 year old, his father abandoned the family, and a year later his mother died of tuberculosis. He was taken into the home of John Allan, a Richmond merchant, and of his childless wife. He was later taken to Scotland and England, where he was given a classical education that was continued in Richmond. For 11 months in 1826, he attended the University of Virginia, but his gambling losses at the university so incensed his guardian that he refused to let him continue, and Poe returned to Richmond to find his sweetheart, Sarah Elmira Royster, engaged. He went to Boston, where in 1827 he published a pamphlet of youthful Byronic poems, Tamerlane, and other poems. Poverty forced him to join the army under the name of Edgar A. Perry. Before going to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, Poe published a new volume at Baltimore, El Auraf, Tamerlane, and Minor Poems, 1829. He successfully sought expulsion from the Academy and proceeded to New York and brought out a volume of poems containing several masterpieces. He then returned to Baltimore, where he began to write stories. In 1833, his Miss Found in a Bottle won $50 from a Baltimore weekly, and by 1835 he was in Richmond as editor of Southern Literary Messenger. There he made a name as a critical reviewer and married his young cousin Virginia Clemm, who was only 13. Poe was dismissed from his job in Richmond, apparently for drinking, and went to New York City. Drinking was in fact to be the bane of his life. It gave rise to the conjecture that Poe was a drug addict, but according to medical testimony he had a brain lesion. While in New York City in 1838, he published a lone prose narrative, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, combining, as often in his tales, much factual material with the wildest fancies. It is considered one inspiration of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. In 1839, he became a co-editor of Burton Gentleman's Magazine in Philadelphia. There, a contract for a monthly feature stimulated him to write William Wilson and The Fall of the House of Usher, stories of supernatural horror. Later, in 1839, Poe's Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque appeared. In 1841, he printed The Murders in the Rue Morgue, the first detective story. In 1843, his The Gold Bug won a prize of $100 from the Philadelphia Dollar newspaper, which gave him a great publicity. In 1844, he wrote The Balloon Hoax for the Sun and became sub-editor of the New York Mirror. In the New York Mirror of January 29, 1845, appeared his most famous poem, The Raven, which gave him national fame at once. Poe's wife, Virginia, died in January 1847. The following year, he went to Providence, Rhode Island to woo Sarah Helen Whitman, a poet. There they had a brief engagement. In 1848, he also published the lecture Eureka, a transcendental explanation of the universe, which has been hailed as a masterpiece by some critics and as a nonsense by others. In 1849, he went south, had a wild spree in Philadelphia, but got safely to Richmond. Poe had some forebodings of death when he left Richmond for Baltimore late in September. There he died, although whether from drinking, heart failure, or other causes was still uncertain in the 21st century. He was buried in Westminster Presbyterian Churchyard in Baltimore.
Edgar Allan Poe's work was inspired by many themes, for example, Romanticism, which was popular in the early and mid-19th century. This particular literary movement was famous for its emotional expression and imaginative approach. This also combined well with Poe's imagination. He used impossible combinations of materials and objects in his stories. This dramatic and unique approach made him a memorable and distinguished figure in the world of literature. One interesting detail about his private life is the difference of opinions that people had on him. His family and friends described him as loving and devoted, while other acquaintances called him irritable, selfish, and even unethical. Considering his dramatic works, which exhibited sadness and anxiety. For example, his short story, The Telltale Heart, shows this very same duality of character that can be seen from his personal life. It's filled with moral torture of the main character that is unable to deal with his emotions. However, a large piece of his work is made up of short poems. Some of these show a considerably different side of the character. One of his most known works is Annabel Lee. This sad, however beautiful poem shows a very gentle approach to love and feeling. He uses the symbolism of heaven and hell in this poem, explaining the reason for her death as jealousy of the heavens. He uses even more symbolism to express feelings in other works. Often these are used to explain so called unexplainable concepts like love, death, and time. The wide range of themes Poe explored and his use of unexpectedly detailed description of feelings are a few of the reasons why he left such a great impact on the literary world.